The massive alien war room buzzed with activity as hundreds of purple-skinned creatures studied holographic displays floating in the air. These were the Vorthak, a species that had conquered 47 different worlds without breaking a sweat. Now they had their eyes set on a small blue planet called Earth. General Nexus stood at the center of it all, his four muscular arms crossed as he watched footage of human soldiers in combat. To his alien eyes, it looked like complete madness. Humans were diving behind cover, shouting orders that seemed to contradict each other, and making split-second decisions that defied all military logic. "This is what they call warfare," Nexus asked his officers, his voice dripping with disgust. "Look at them scramble around like frightened insects. No formation, no discipline. They fight with their hearts instead of their heads." Captain Vorthex, his most trusted advisor, nodded enthusiastically. "Our computer analysis is complete, sir. We've studied over 50,000 hours of their military footage from something they call the Internet. These humans are completely predictable. When they're scared, they retreat. When they're angry, they charge forward blindly. It's almost too easy." The aliens had spent months watching human war documentaries, news reports, and even fictional movies about Earth's military. What they saw convinced them that humans were nothing more than emotional creatures who happened to have developed some basic weapons technology. But 800,000 kilometers away, on a hidden base built deep inside Earth's moon, someone was listening to every word they said. Captain Daeho Park adjusted his headphones and smiled grimly as he translated the alien communications. The Korean Special Forces veteran had been monitoring Vorthak transmissions since their scout ships first appeared at the edge of the solar system. What he heard would have been funny if it wasn't so dangerous. These space conquerors thought they understood human warfare because they had watched some old combat footage. They had no clue what they were really looking at. Daeho had spent 20 years learning his trade in places that didn't appear on any tourist maps. He had fought in mountain passes where the air was so thin it hurt to breathe. He had cleared terrorist hideouts in cities where every doorway could be your last. He had learned that sometimes the smartest thing a warrior could do was look weak right up until the moment he struck. "Sir, they're broadcasting surrender terms to Earth's major cities," reported Lieutenant Mina Kim from her communication station. The young woman had already served in 3 different combat zones, despite being only 26 years old. "The Vorthak fleet is moving into attack formation. They expect us to give up without a fight." Daeho leaned back in his chair and thought about all the warriors he had served with over the years. Tough American Marines who treated impossible odds like a personal challenge. Silent British commandos who could make themselves invisible in broad daylight. Ruthless Russian operators who never left a mission unfinished. German engineers who could turn household items into deadly weapons. All of these soldiers had learned the same lesson that Daeho carried in his heart. Sometimes you had to let your enemy believe they were winning right up until the moment you showed them what real warfare looked like. "Let them come," he whispered as alien ships filled Earth's sky. "School is about to begin." The sky over Earth turned dark as massive alien ships descended through the clouds like falling mountains. Each Vorthak vessel was the size of a city block, their hulls gleaming with strange metals that seemed to bend light around them. Admiral Korek stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the primitive human world grow larger on his viewing screen. "Send the surrender message," he commanded with absolute confidence. "Tell these humans they have 1 hour to lay down their weapons and accept our rule. After that, we begin the destruction of their major cities." The message went out in dozens of human languages, broadcast on every radio and television frequency the aliens could find. Korex expected immediate panic, followed by quick submission. That's how it had worked on the last 47 worlds his empire had conquered, but high above Earth's atmosphere, Colonel Jun Seo Lee was preparing to give the aliens exactly what they expected to see, just not for the reasons they thought. Jun Seo commanded a small fleet of human ships that looked ancient compared to the alien vessels. His flagship was an old carrier that had been built decades ago, patched and repaired so many times that half the hull was replacement parts. The Korean colonel knew his ships couldn't win a straight fight against the Vorthak fleet. That was exactly the point. "All ships, listen carefully. Junseo spoke into his communication system. "We're going to give these invaders a show they'll never forget. When I give the order, I want you to fight exactly like they expect us to fight. Panic, confusion, desperation. Make them believe we're just scared humans with outdated weapons." When battle began at exactly noon Pacific time, human ships charged forward in what looked like a suicidal attack, firing missiles and energy weapons that barely scratched the alien shields. The Vorthak responded with devastating firepower that cut through human vessels like paper. To Admiral Corex, it looked exactly like what his intelligence reports had predicted. The humans fought bravely but stupidly, throwing their ships away, in emotional attacks that accomplished nothing except getting themselves killed. "Look at them," Corex said to his officers as they watched human ships explode on their screens. "They're fighting with their hearts instead of their minds. No strategy, no coordination, just raw courage and bad decisions." What the aliens didn't see was Colonel Junseo's real plan unfolding perfectly. Every human ship that died in the 5D battle had actually launched escape pods filled with Special Forces soldiers. Every desperate attack had planted tracking devices on alien hulls. Every panicked retreat had gathered crucial intelligence about Vorthak weapons and defenses. Down on Earth's surface, Sergeant Hae-Jin Choi watched the orbital battle through high-powered telescopes from her hiding spot in the Canadian wilderness. The former Special Operations soldier had spent the last month preparing for this exact moment. As burning wreckage from both fleets lit up the sky like fireworks, Hae-Jin smiled and activated her encrypted radio. "Phase 1 complete," she whispered, to resistance cells scattered across the globe. "The fish have taken the bait. Repeat, the fish have taken the bait." Within hours, Vorthak landing ships were touching down on 3 continents, exactly where human strategists had predicted they would land. The aliens established their occupation zones with military precision, confident that they had broken human resistance in a single afternoon. They had no idea that the real war was just beginning. The subway tunnels beneath Seoul had been dark for 3 days since the alien invasion began. Most people thought the underground was empty, abandoned when the Vorthak forces landed and took control of the city above. But deep in the maze of concrete passages, Master Sergeant Dongwoo Nam was very much alive and working. Dongwoo moved through the tunnels like a ghost, his military boots making no sound on the damp concrete. He had spent 15 years fighting in places where making noise meant death, and those skills served him well now. The Korean veteran carried a small backpack filled with chalk, spray paint, and other simple tools that looked harmless to anyone who might find them. But these weren't just art supplies. They were the building blocks of something the aliens would never see coming. At each major intersection, Dongwoo left small marks on the walls. A circle here, a line there, sometimes just a single letter that looked like random graffiti to untrained eyes. But to other veterans, these symbols told a complete story. Safe houses, weapon caches, meeting points, emergency escape routes. This was a language that soldiers from dozens of different countries had learned to read during years of fighting in hostile territory. It didn't matter if you were Korean, American, British, or Russian. If you had served in places where the enemy controlled the streets, you knew how to find these hidden messages. 2 hours after Dongwoo finished marking his sector, Staff Sergeant So-Young Kang found the first symbol spray-painted on a maintenance door. The Korean combat engineer had been hiding in the subway system since the invasion started, waiting for this exact moment. So-Young had learned her deadly trade by dismantling roadside bombs in places where one wrong move meant death. She could turn a cell phone into a remote detonator, transform fertilizer into high explosives, and make weapons from things you could buy at any hardware store. Following the chalk marks like breadcrumbs, So-Young made her way through the tunnel system, until she found Dongwoo waiting in an abandoned train car. Neither soldier was surprised to see the other. Veterans had a way of finding each other, especially when their country was under attack. "How many do we have in this sector?" Dongwoo asked without wasting time on greetings. Soldiers didn't need small talk when there was work to do. 200 confirmed, So-Young replied, pulling out a hand-drawn map of the city. "Former Special Forces, Marines, Army engineers, even some police tactical teams. The network is activating faster than we hoped. All across the world, similar." Meetings were happening. In the ruins of Detroit, former Marine sergeants were teaching factory workers how to make improvised weapons. In the mountains of Afghanistan, where many of these soldiers first learned to fight an enemy that refused to stay dead, local veterans were sharing caves with international fighters who had come home years ago. The Vorthak had made a critical mistake. They assumed that conquering Earth's military meant conquering Earth's people. They didn't understand that on this planet, the line between soldier and citizen had been blurred by decades of global conflict. Every veteran was a teacher. Every civilian was a potential student. Every neighborhood was becoming a fortress, and every city block was turning into a battlefield that the aliens would never understand. The underground network was spreading like wildfire, and the Vorthak had no idea it even existed. The mountain road outside Busan looked peaceful in the early morning light. Birds sang in the trees, and a gentle breeze carried the smell of pine through the air. It was the kind of place where families might come for picnics on weekends. But Corporal Jin-Woo Park saw something very different when he looked at this stretch of asphalt. He saw a killing ground. Jin-Woo had spent 3 tours of duty in places where roads like this one claimed lives every single day. He had learned to read the landscape like a book, spotting the perfect places to hide deadly surprises for unwary enemies. The slight curve that blocked vision around the bend, the drainage ditch that provided perfect cover, the overhanging rocks. That would channel an explosion in exactly the right direction. Working through the night with 2 other Korean veterans and a handful of local civilians, Jin-Woo had transformed this innocent-looking road into a death trap. The explosive device, hidden beneath the asphalt, was built from fertilizer, diesel fuel and spare parts from a construction site. Simple materials that could be found anywhere, assembled using knowledge that had been paid for in blood on distant battlefields. At exactly 9:15 in the morning, a convoy of Vorthak vehicles rounded the curve at 30 kilometers per hour, right on schedule. The aliens were creatures of habit, following their patrol routes with military precision that made them completely predictable to anyone who bothered to watch and learn. The explosion lit up the mountainside like a miniature sun. When the smoke cleared, nothing remained of the lead vehicle except scattered metal and a crater in the road. The other alien vehicles stopped in confusion, their crews trying to understand what had just happened to their comrades. That confusion lasted exactly long enough for Jin-Woo to trigger the second explosive device. 3,000 kilometers away, in Tokyo, former Marine sniper Yoon Ji-song was applying a different kind of lesson learned in foreign wars. She lay motionless on the roof of a 20-story building, her rifle trained on a Vorthak command post nearly 2 kilometers away. Yoon-ji had learned her trade in cities where every window could hide a sniper and every rooftop was a potential firing position. She knew how to remain invisible in plain sight, how to calculate wind speed and bullet drop over impossible distances, and most importantly, how to disappear before the enemy could find her. The Vorthak commander stood in the open courtyard below, gesturing to his troops with typical alien arrogance. These creatures had conquered dozens of worlds where warfare was conducted according to civilized rules. They expected their enemies to fight honorably, face to face, in organized battles with clear front lines. They had never faced an enemy who treated honor as a luxury they couldn't afford. Yoon-ji's shot took the alien commander's head clean off, at a distance that should have been impossible with human weapons. By the time his bodyguards figured out where the bullet had come from, she was already 3 blocks away, blending into the crowd of civilians like water disappearing into sand. Or across Earth, similar lessons were being taught to an enemy that had never attended this particular school. Veterans who had learned their trade in places with names like Fallujah, Kandahar, and Mogadishu were showing the Vorthak what 20 years of continuous warfare had taught the human race. The aliens were getting an education they would never forget. The alien interrogation room was built to intimidate prisoners, with walls that glowed an unsettling purple color and strange symbols carved into the metal surfaces. But Colonel Kyung-ho Shin sat in his restraints like he was having coffee with an old friend, completely relaxed despite being captured 3 days earlier during a failed rescue mission. Warlord Thakus paced around the Korean officer with growing frustration. The massive alien had interrogated prisoners from 47 different worlds, and they all eventually broke down and revealed their military secrets. But this human was different. Instead of showing fear or desperation, he seemed almost amused by the whole situation. "Your resistance is pointless," Thakus growled, his forearms gesturing at the holographic displays showing Vorthak victories across the galaxy. "We have conquered every species we have encountered. Your primitive weapons cannot match our technology. Why do you continue this foolish fight?" Kyung-ho leaned back in his chair and smiled. "You want to know why we keep fighting? Because you don't understand what you're really up against." The alien's translator struggled with some of the Korean officer's words, but Thakus got the general meaning. He had heard similar defiance from other species right before they surrendered completely. "Hey, explain," Thakus demanded. "What makes humans different from the other races we have defeated?" Kyung-ho looked directly into the alien's strange yellow eyes. "Every other species you conquered probably had a few hundred years of military history, maybe 1,000 if you were unlucky. We've been at war for our entire existence as a species, 10,000 years of continuous conflict, and every generation learned something new about killing." The alien pulled up intelligence reports on his computer system, showing footage of human conflicts throughout history. "Yes, we have studied your wars, primitive conflicts with simple weapons, nothing that compares to modern galactic warfare." "That's where you're wrong," Kyung-ho said, his voice getting serious for the first time. "You think war is about technology. We learned a long time ago that war is about people, about breaking your enemy's will to fight, about making them afraid to leave their safe spaces, about turning their own strengths against them." Thakus studied the human more carefully. There was something in the prisoner's voice that he had never heard from other captives. Not desperation or bravado, but complete confidence. "Every farmer on our planet knows how to make explosives from household chemicals," Kyung-ho continued. "Every mechanic can build weapons from spare parts. Every child grows up hearing stories from veterans who survived battles that would give your soldiers nightmares." The alien commander accessed more intelligence files, looking at places with names like Vietnam, Afghanistan, Iraq, and Syria. Conflicts that had lasted decades, producing entire generations of warriors who treated impossible odds like a normal Tuesday. "Your soldiers are mentally damaged by your endless wars," Thakus said, trying to regain control of the conversation. "They are broken goods, not proper warriors." Kyung-ho's smile returned, but this time it was cold enough to freeze blood. "No, they're exactly what we designed them to be. You've spent your whole empire fighting species that learned war from textbooks. We learned it by doing it, over and over again until we got really good at it." Outside the interrogation room, Vorthak casualty reports were piling up faster than the aliens could process them. Their perfectly trained soldiers were being defeated by enemies who refused to follow any recognizable military doctrine. "Welcome to Earth," Kyung-ho whispered. "Class is now in session." Major General Korak slammed his 4 fists on the command table, making the holographic displays flicker and dance. The massive alien's purple skin had turned an angry shade of red as he stared at the casualty reports streaming in from across the Australian continent. In just 2 weeks, his occupation force had lost 30% of its strength to an enemy that seemed to be everywhere and nowhere at once. "This is impossible," Korax roared at his assembled officers. "These humans have weapons that are centuries behind our technology. Their ships are scrap metal held together with hope and desperation. How are they achieving these kill ratios against superior Vorthak forces?" Captain Vex, his chief tactical advisor, nervously adjusted the data display. The numbers told a story that defied everything the Vorthak military had learned about conquest. "Sir, they're not fighting us like soldiers. They fight like hunting animals. They know our patrol routes before we establish them. They predict our responses to their attacks before we make them." What the aliens couldn't understand was happening 3,000 kilometers away, in a hidden bunker beneath the ruins of Sydney. Former Special Forces Captain Yun Seo Lim sat surrounded by dozens of computer screens, each one showing a different piece of the puzzle that was slowly driving the Vorthak insane. Yun Seo had spent 15 years studying enemies in places where knowing your opponent's next move meant the difference between going home and going into a body bag. She had learned to read patrol patterns, supply schedules, communication habits, and most importantly, the psychological weaknesses that every military force tried to hide. "They're too predictable," she explained to her team of analysts, a mix of Korean veterans and international fighters who had found their way to Australia after the invasion began. The Vorthak follow their doctrine exactly, every single time. No improvisation, no adaptation. They're fighting the war they trained for, not the war they're actually in. Every piece of captured alien equipment, every intercepted communication, every battlefield observation was fed into a network of human veterans who had spent decades learning to think like their enemies. The information was then used to predict exactly where the Vorthak would be, what they would do, and how to hurt them the most. In the mountains of Tibet, Sergeant First Class Jae-min Ko was putting that intelligence to deadly use. The Korean Special Forces veteran had teamed up with local Tibetan fighters and a handful of international soldiers who had somehow made their way to the roof of the world after the invasion began. Their target was a Vorthak supply depot that fed 3 different alien garrisons. According to Yoon Seo's analysis, the depot would be lightly guarded at exactly 14:30 local time, when the garrison troops rotated shifts and the supply convoy was still 2 hours away. Jae-min had learned mountain warfare in places where armies had been dying for centuries. He knew how to use the thin air, brutal cold, and impossible terrain as weapons against enemies who weren't prepared for the environment. The attack lasted exactly 17 minutes. When it was over, the supply depot was a burning ruin, and Jae-min's team had vanished into the mountain peaks like ghosts made of snow and shadow. The depot burned for 3 days, visible from space. The Vorthak never saw their attackers, never found their escape route, and never understood how humans could move so fast at such high altitude. The aliens were learning that Earth was a very expensive school. The encrypted message went out at exactly midnight Greenwich Mean Time, transmitted on frequencies that only veterans would know to monitor. It was a simple code that soldiers from a dozen different countries had used during years of joint operations in hostile territory. But the message itself was anything but simple. Operation Forgotten Soldier was about to begin. Lieutenant Colonel Hae-young Park sat in a bunker carved deep beneath the ruins of Pyongyang, surrounded by communication equipment that had been salvaged from 3 different armies. The Korean Special Forces commander had served with military units from around the world, fighting in conflicts that most people preferred to forget. Now all of that experience was about to be put to use against an enemy that thought war was a game played by rules. "All stations, this is Ghost Actual," Hae-young spoke into her headset, using the call sign that had followed her through 15 years of combat. "Phase 1 is a go. Remember, we're not just fighting for Earth. We're fighting to show the galaxy what humans can do when we stop pretending to be civilized." The response came from veterans scattered across the globe, each one confirming their readiness in the clipped, professional tones of soldiers who had learned to trust each other with their lives. In Sydney, former Navy SEAL Won Ho-young led his team through the storm drains that ran beneath the Vorthak Command Center. The Korean warrior had spent years learning to move through urban environments where every building could be a trap and every street corner a potential ambush. Now he was using those skills to bring the war directly to the alien commanders who thought they were safe behind their energy shields and force fields. Halfway around the world in Moscow, ex-Special Forces operator Soo-jin Lee was coordinating with American Rangers and British commandos who had somehow found their way to the Russian capital after the invasion began. Language barriers meant nothing when soldiers communicated through hand signals, learned in 100 different firefights. In Cairo, former paratroopers Min Ho-yoon and Rami Cho synchronized their watches with German Special Forces operatives who had been hiding in the ancient city since the Vorthak landing. The plan they were about to execute had been tested in battles across 4 continents, refined by warriors who had learned that the only rule in war was winning. For the first time in human history, soldiers who had spent centuries killing each other were working together against a common enemy. Korean veterans fought alongside Japanese Special Forces. Indian commandos coordinated with Pakistani Rangers. Israeli Special Operations units shared intelligence with Arab fighters who had been their enemies just months before. The Vorthak had made a fundamental error in their understanding of human nature. They thought that Earth's history of constant warfare made humans weak and divided. They didn't realize that all of those conflicts had created a global network of warriors who understood each other better than they understood their own governments. At exactly 0300 hours, coordinated attacks began on 6 continents simultaneously. Communication centers went dark, supply convoys disappeared into ambushes, and command posts exploded in balls of fire that could be seen from orbit. The aliens were about to discover that Earth's greatest weapon wasn't technology or tactics. It was the simple fact that humans had been preparing for this fight their entire lives, and they absolutely refused to lose. Admiral Corex stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching Earth turn slowly beneath him like a wounded animal. The planet's surface was scarred with the fires of war, and from space it looked like the humans were finally beaten. It was time to end this embarrassing conflict, once and for all. "Prepare orbital bombardment," Corex commanded his weapons officers. "We will sterilize every major city on the planet. These primitive humans have caused us enough trouble with their guerrilla tactics. Superior firepower will succeed where tactical superiority has failed." The massive Vorthak fleet moved into perfect bombardment formation, their energy cannons charging with enough power to turn entire cities into glass. Corex was confident that raw destruction would accomplish what months of ground fighting had not. After all, no species could survive the complete annihilation of their civilization. The first sign that something was wrong came when Lieutenant Commander Ji-Hoon Bak activated systems that weren't supposed to exist. Hidden in asteroid fields, disguised as space debris and concealed behind Earth's moon, dozens of defense platforms suddenly came online. Each platform was built using captured Vorthak technology, reverse-engineered by human engineers who had learned to improvise weapons from scrap metal and determination. Ji-Hoon had spent the last 6 months working as a slave laborer in a Vorthak construction facility, pretending to be just another broken human, while secretly studying every piece of alien technology he could get his hands on. The Korean engineer had memorized weapon specifications, power systems, and targeting computers, all while planning for this exact moment. "Firing solution acquired on flagship," Ji-Hoon reported calmly from his hidden command center. "All platforms. Report ready. Weapons are free." The defense platforms unleashed a coordinated barrage that caught the Vorthak fleet completely unprepared. Energy beams that the aliens had designed to destroy planets were now being used against their own ships, fired by humans who had learned to turn every enemy weapon into an advantage. Admiral Corex watched in horror as his supposedly invincible fleet began taking casualties from weapons that looked exactly like his own. Impossible. How did they acquire our technology? How did they learn to use it so effectively? Down on Earth's surface, the final phase of humanity's counterattack was beginning. Captain Ye-Jin Nam led a mixed force of Korean veterans and international fighters through the rubble-filled streets of New York City, heading straight for the main Vorthak command center. Ye-Jin had learned urban warfare in places like Mosul and Aleppo, where every building was a fortress and every street corner could hide a sniper. She knew how to move through destroyed cities, how to use rubble and debris as cover, and most importantly, how to coordinate complex attacks in environments where communication was nearly impossible. "Remember," she told her team as they moved, "through the ruins, we're not just soldiers anymore, we're Earth's immune system, and we're about to show these invaders what happens when you try to infect the wrong planet." The assault on the command center began with precision explosives that turned the alien fortifications into death traps. Within minutes, Vorthak defenders found themselves fighting an enemy that seemed to know exactly where they would be and exactly how they would respond. The command center fell in 17 minutes. The Vorthak garrison never understood what hit them, never figured out how humans could move so fast through terrain they had thought was impassable. Above and below, humanity was teaching the galaxy its final lesson. The last Vorthak transport ship lifted off from Earth's surface like a wounded bird struggling to fly. Inside the cramped vessel, the remnants of what had once been the galaxy's most feared military force sat in stunned silence. These were soldiers who had conquered 47 different worlds without breaking a sweat, and now they were running away from a planet they had expected to conquer in a matter of days. Admiral Corex sat slumped in his command chair, staring at the casualty reports that told the story of complete military disaster. 90% losses, entire battalions wiped out by enemies they never saw, command centers destroyed by weapons built from spare parts and fertilizer. It was the kind of defeat that military academies would study for centuries. "Send the final transmission to Home Fleet," Corex ordered his communications officer, his voice barely above a whisper. "Earth is not to be approached under any circumstances. Mark it as a forbidden zone. Any ship that enters their solar system does so at their own risk." The message that went out to Vorthak High Command was simple and terrifying. Their species has been forged by 10,000 years of continuous warfare. Every human is a potential soldier, every veteran a tactical genius. They don't just win battles, they evolve them. We have awakened something that should have been left alone. Down on Earth's surface, General Daeho Park stood in what used to be the main Vorthak command center in Seoul. The alien technology scattered around the room would be studied, improved upon, and eventually turned into weapons that would make humanity even more dangerous than it already was. The Korean veteran was surrounded by soldiers from a dozen different countries, all of them bearing the scars and thousand-yard stares of warriors who had seen too much combat. But for the first time in years they were smiling. They had proven something that every human soldier had always known deep in their hearts, that Earth's greatest strength wasn't its technology or its resources, but its absolute refusal to give up. "Sir," Lieutenant Minar Kim approached with a communication device that was buzzing with incoming messages. "We're receiving surrender requests from 17 different alien governments. They want to negotiate non-aggression pacts immediately." Daeho nodded as he read through the messages. Alien species that had never heard of Earth 3 months ago were now desperately trying to avoid any conflict with humanity. Word was spreading through the galaxy that there was a planet full of creatures who treated war like an art form and never, ever stopped learning how to get better at it. "Tell them," Daeho said slowly, "that Earth is willing to negotiate, but make sure they understand that the terms are non-negotiable. We've been preparing for this conversation for our entire history." Above them, human ships moved through the solar system with the confidence of apex predators who had just proven their dominance. The alien technology scattered across Earth's surface was already being reverse-engineered by human scientists who had learned their trade by studying enemy weapons in foxholes and bombed-out buildings. The galaxy had learned what every human warrior already knew, that peace wasn't the absence of conflict, but the presence of those strong enough to maintain it. Earth had become the place where empires came to die, and every species in the galaxy now knew it. The universe had a new sheriff, and it had learned to shoot in places with names like Normandy, Gettysburg, and the Chosin Reservoir.